It is April 12th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. The ACT committee meeting with myself, Nick Allen, Brian McGinnis, and Patrick McCoy. We're going to call the meeting to order at 5:31 p.m. Item number 2 is comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda. Anything? Okay, great. We can move on to our discussion items, and we can go into 3A, which is our borough manager report.
Thank you. I wanted to maybe take 5 minutes of the committee's time just to talk about some things that are going on in the administration you might not know about. And invite any feedback from the committee on this, on what sorts of things you'd want to know about in the future. I'd like to focus on policy and personnel first. We continue to recruit for the position of Director of Public Works. We're getting close to the finish line on that one. Hope to make an offer of employment sometime in the near future. And we'll have more on that later. The borough is hiring in a number of its different departments as well. So keep an eye out for offers of employment from the borough and if you're looking for work. This year we are preparing to engage with the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees Labor Union to negotiate a renewal of the current labor contract, which expires at the end of the year. We simply kicked off that bargaining process. That covers employees, select employees in the public works, police, and parking departments. About a third of the borough employees are covered by this and represented by this union. I took some of our management team with me last Friday in the morning to Immaculata University, where we had a great training session to talk about leadership and management principles, and we got to have good dialogue with other members of local government. Bill Mann attended. So I look forward to providing some more opportunities for managers to talk about how you create teams and manage and promote individuals and perform and get your teams rolling. We are embarking upon creating a land records management system. That's something that Nick Fink, our new hire in our for data management and enterprise applications, is spearheading. So we had a good working session with our department heads to talk about all the ways in which borough departments use land-based information. So our hope is to coordinate with or package all of that information into a scope of services that we'll take to the marketplace to not only help us do our work, but coordinate interdepartmental information, make the public experience more efficient and better for filing for building permits, for filing for other things that have to be done online. But with Nick's help and Nick's expertise, we can scrape or use the information that's going to be created in that system and have a warehouse of borough-related land records that we can build off of, analyze, look at in the future. So that's an important thing. I think when you go out to market and you buy these third-party software platforms, the information, which is ours, the borough's, tends to reside in these silos. But we're kind of configuring it differently so all that information gets copied to our internal network and gets used and leveraged by all the departments. I can get really wonky with this stuff, but I think it's going to pay really good long-term dividends for us. So more on that in the future. We have an RFP for legal services that's out in the wild. Expiration date on that one is April 30th, and I expect to have the engineering financial services up by weekend. And lastly, I just want to update everybody that we met for the second time with the pension committee. That is a group of individuals, some of which are appointed by council, some of which are ex officio appointees. For instance, the borough manager is one of those. And this committee is formed, what it does and how it was formed and its powers and duties are all part of the pension plan document that governs the police and non-uniform pension plans. So it's the administrative advisory body. And right now they're looking at an RFP for investment management services, and we should have that out in the next several weeks. So look for that coming to probably the finance committee, I would imagine, in either June or July meeting cycle. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate that report, as always. Any questions, comments? Any public questions or comments here? Alrighty, great. Thanks again, Sean. I think we're good to go to move on to item 3B, which is the reapportionment of Westchester's voting wards. Do we have the map handy to pop up there? I feel like that'd be helpful. And while that's coming up, I guess we can provide some context that this is something we're considering, considering recent census data, that we would try to balance out the voting wards. They're kind of imbalanced right now with population, especially a handful of our wards are definitely a little bit too big. And I think it makes sense to start to balance those out. And the questions we need to ask is like, how do we handle the large population of students? If they all end up in one ward, you'll have, I mean, there's a lot of implications there. You'll have a small group of, permanent residents voting on a council person, and potentially large group of more transient students that are welcome to vote, but are, generally less engaged. I ended up on council here, and I was still voting in Maryland for part of my college career, so totally get it. So balancing that is just interesting. So I don't know if there are any thoughts.
Right, and I do commend you and Sean for putting this together, but just want to remind the public that this is actually in accordance, and we are required to do so every 10 years with the census. And so our determination is when we're, after we review the document in the wards, is to when we want to implement this for the next possible election. Obviously, the May primary is going to be too soon, so we may want to consider the fall election to at least get this started of this year of 2022.
And I can just kind of try to verbally explain just a little bit of what we discussed a couple weeks ago. Between wards 1 and 7, those are your northern wards, the boundary kind of meanders from High Street over to Darlington, and there's that block by Barclay that actually ends up over in Ward 1. And if you just make High Street that boundary between 1 and 7, that gets 1 and 7 into balance really nicely. And then in terms of, the question, so I'm trying to see, we had that spreadsheet with the students. Is that in my email? It's probably in my email. It's not really possible to share the student population in wards 1 and 7, since those are on the northern side of the borough. So that's kind of a non-starter there. But perfect. But like trying to spread that population throughout wards 5, 5, 3, and 4. So 3, 4, 5. Trying to split the student population between those southern wards is something that started to look like it made a lot of sense. You can see that 2776 and that 907 around the university. The idea was to just take that, divide it into 3, between 3, 4, 5. The boundary between wards 5 and 3, I forget the exact, it might have been New Street. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, which number, but just moving that boundary east, and then taking the boundary between 5 and 4, and kind of doing a similar thing and moving that a little bit east, kind of balances out that 3, 4, 5. They split the student population evenly, and then we get all of our total population within that threshold, that 5% threshold that we're after. It's actually pretty close. I was pretty happy with how the numbers rounded out there. So like the goals of making something like geographically make sense, neighborhoods aren't like totally split up. I think I'm really comfortable with how that shook out.
And just to confirm for the public, that High Street is going to be the natural dividing line separating the east versus the west, 1 versus 7, for example. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's true. And that would continue to be the boundary between, wards 2 and 6. That would continue to be the boundary between, I'm trying to think, wards 2, especially specifically 2W and 3. That would stay intact. Where things get a little bit tricky is we're gonna be splitting that Westchester University block into 4. So High Street would not be the divider just for Ward 4, because they would kind of take part of the university population. But other than that, yes, High Street would be the boundary all the way through the borough.
Can I suggest maybe as a way forward, Nick and I met and talked about this, and honestly, the geography and the numbers really surprisingly fell into place. I thought this was going to be a extremely difficult problem to solve. Would it be help the committee if maybe next month we came back with a proposed redistricting of the wards? We'd still have 7 wards, and we could show you on a map what we're talking about and then go from there.
I think that would be a big help, especially the, streets, that way everyone can see, what ward they're going to be in.
The only bit of information we don't have right now is, and Nick was speaking of this, the numbers on this map correspond to the population in census blocks, and that's typically a pretty small geography. There's over 2,700 students living on the south part of the main campus superblock where most of the residences are. We have to figure out a way in the new redistricting to kind of portion that student population as well as the 900 that live in the north quarter of that campus block into the adjacent voting wards. So I have to talk to the university and understand where the students live on a sub-census block level so we can draw that accurately.
To Sean and Nick, is the 907, is that now in 3 or is it in 5? That wasn't clear to me on the map.
Sorry, I'm not good with the
3.
Numbers of the wards.
It's 3.
It's 3.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor DeBaptiste. That's an interesting discrete math problem. You only need 4 different colors to not have the boundaries. So 2E and 1 are the same color, just to answer your question. But
Yeah, it's a little, this map's a little confusing with the colors that were chosen because the colors were based on the overall number of people in those wards. So that's why those two wards are the same color on that map. But there's a dividing line. To answer the quick answer to your question is this is the existing ward boundaries you're looking at on this map. And it's correct.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is with the 2020 numbers, Ward 5 is the largest by population. But when you subtract the student population, I think it becomes the smallest population.
By a lot.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing we were trying to balance out a little bit, was to try to narrow that gap. Any other questions? I think that's a good road forward to come back next month with something a little bit more concrete to look at in terms of a proposal.
No, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
It actually be eight voting precincts because you have 2E.
Right, any other public comments or questions on?
There's going to be 7 wards total. Correct. They are not, I mean, they'll shift due to population, but they will still be voting. They're each individual voting precincts.
Not work as good as the ones up there.
There you go.
Lisa Dorsey, Ward 7. As we were making this decision for the wards, would it be beneficial for this body to understand how the ward system came about in the 90s?
Absolutely. I do agree with that.
So we'll put that on the agenda for May or try and get it done next week.
It's your call.
Yeah, would we want to invite Sam in?
Yes.
That would be great.
I mean, do we want to make that part of an executive session?
I'll let the committee make that decision, but yeah.
I mean, to be fair, the agenda on ACT committee is generally pretty light, so we might be able to do that next month during ACT committee. Although the idea of doing it during like a public council meeting, I think is good, because I think the more members of the public that are aware of that, I think the better. I think it'd be a good, public info opportunity for sure.
Okay.
And we could see what works with Sam's schedule if he, the feeling he'd be interested to come in and talk. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other public comment or questions on 3B? Cool. Hey, that's a fun story. I think that's a good idea. So we're good to move on to number 4, and we'll take a look at 4A, which is to approve the March minutes. I've had no issue with the March minutes. Good? All right, awesome. Well, okay, it felt funny doing that first. But hey, it's done. So we'll go on to 4B, which is to execute a non-exclusive video sharing license agreement with PennDOT. And we have an attachment there.
If I may, this is a standard agreement that would allow the borough to use information gathered from uh, uh, cameras that are placed on Route 202. And one of the things Nick is working on is a traffic alert system, centralizing reporting information to one location on our website. And this is, in order to use that information, we need this agreement signed, and I wanted to get council's permission to sign this since it was a contract with PennDOT.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Sounds good to me. Any questions?
Only question I have, is 202 the only place that PennDOT has cameras, like, Marshall or any of the other state roads in the borough?
It's the only camera locations close to Westchester Borough, yeah. So,
Great. Any public comment, questions? Well, we can call that a 3-0 recommendation and move on to item 4C, which is another fun one, is the Homeworld Charter Amendment. And just for background, this is, it's been a long time coming. We've been talking about this one for a while now. The heart of the matter here was when a resident was concerned about members of council or the mayor holding 2 offices at one time. And I think a really healthy discussion that came out of that was the idea that if you are a person on council, let's say I decided to run for state house this year and I was successful. Because it's going to be the end of my term, I'd have 1 year left on my term. If I were to resign when I would get sworn in January, it would trigger a special election for Ward 2 council person in May, and there would be a regularly scheduled primary for Ward 2 council person in May. And so you'd have voters voting for the same seat twice on one ballot. And that just seems like a mess that we're trying to avoid. And that's kind of like the heart behind this entire debate and conversation, is how do we prevent that from happening? Because that kind of provides an incentive, like you might want to stay on a little bit longer till like February, whatever that date is, just to make it easier. Because then you'll have that regular primary. I guess there wouldn't be a special election in that case for the remainder of the term. Whoever council appoints would just finish it outright.
No, I mean, I agree with that premise. There is actually precedent for this before when Gailey became council member in Ward 3. That happened during the 2016 election in November. And that was just a special election, in which case each party nominated their candidate to be on the ballot.
And that was done in an even year, you're saying?
Correct.
Is that consistent? Is what happened in the past consistent with what the language that we have now? The idea that we could do a special election to complete a term in an even year November election?
I mean, I would have to, we just got the document, so I would have to review that. But I believe that if there were to be a special election, and in the case of someone winning another office, that it should be at the next election, whether it be a primary or the general election.
So that would not, in my mind, fix the problem that at least I'm interested in going after.
I mean, it will and it won't, in the fact that there would be a special election. I think the situation we're looking at is when that person holds on to that office for an extended period of time, then that just triggers a primary rather than having a special election.
I guess in my mind, like the primary is always going to happen, right? If it's the end of a term, that's a regularly scheduled primary anyway. And so I'm just interested in making that not happen at the same time as.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that. I mean, if we write that in the home rule charter, because in that way it gives almost any party or any person for that matter to jump into that election.
I mean, and I'd be favorable to that as well. And I think it's definitely something that, like, now that we have the language, I think it might make sense for us to come, like, take a look at it, really digest it, and come back next month with some more thoughts about that. I think that I'm definitely looking forward to finally making a recommendation to full council on this. But I think a good recommendation is better than a rushed one. So I'd be happy to take a look at that.
I'm in
for next
agreement.
month. Does that sound good? Is there any additional public comments on this item? Yes. And to answer your last question, as I've approached this in my mind, it's been vacancy for any reason. So I've been trying to think about it in a big picture way when I've been thinking about it. To your first point, the more hours I put into thinking about this, the more I'm inclined to agree with you that we might be overthinking this a little bit. But I mean, if we have the opportunity to make it a cleaner process, I don't see why we shouldn't do it. If it's possible. If it's not possible, then it's not possible, and we tried. And I'm comfortable with that as well. But it is starting to feel that way, for sure. Any other public comment? Hi, how are you? We're running late here. You're totally fine. Yeah. It's all good. We'll get moving then. Item 4D is to consider renewing Westchester Food Cooperative lease.
This is one of our smaller lessees for lot number 10 in the borough and it expires on an annual basis. So this is a $1 lease from May to November for the use of that space on weekends to put on a very popular, one of the things I love about the town, I've been to it a lot, the Westchester Farmers Market. So
Yeah, this is a every year kind of thing.
You have no objection from me on this.
Perfect.
I have no objections.
Any public comment? Cool. We'll call that one 3-0 and move on to the other part of the parking lot. Item 4E, which is the Westchester Growers Association lease.
So there is some history here I can talk with you offline about as to, you know, why we're doing 2 leases here, but this is a much more costly lease, $50 per Saturday to run the Westchester's Growers Market. And again, May through December, and some select weekends in the wintertime. Yes, you can still get really good local food in the wintertime.
Definitely. Any issues, concerns?
This is the same lease. Nothing's been changed about it.
Yeah, nothing's been changed. We actually approached them about this because we knew it was coming up for renewal.
I have no objections.
No objections.
Any public comment? All right, we'll call that 3-0, and we already did our meeting minutes, so that's cool. Any other business tonight? Not bad. Pulled it in 2 minutes over. We'll take it. Awesome. We will adjourn at 6:02. Thank you.